All right, welcome back, everyone. Thank you so much for coming back into this poetry space with us. So happy to have such a good crowd here tonight. Okay, so I'm going to just dive right into our featured readers. I'm so excited to have Kurt Trzcinski as our opener tonight. Kurt is an ecologist who has studied many ecosystems around the world. He thrives at the edge of poetry and science and hopes that together they can create new visions of how we relate to the world. His second chapbook, Tonewood, from Red Tower Bookworks, comes out this fall. In fact, is out and is on that table, and it's beautiful. Tonewood is a short collection of poems gathered from the author's journeys and work as a field biologist. Each poem is an invitation to pause, connect, and rewild. Really excited to hear from this. Come on up, Kurt.
Thank you, Zoe, and the open mic was great, so thank you for those poems. It's great to be back here. This is my second chapbook, yeah, one thing that's so wonderful about Planet Earth Poetry is the community. So thanks for showing up and supporting poetry, and I hope you enjoy these. I'm going to read one poem out of my first chapbook. This book is called Sacred Greens, and the first poem I'm going to read is called Community's Bounty. I dunk the lettuce, hold their bottoms gently, rinse them of aphids, then turn to rub dirt from their nub ends. Life strong and turgid in each leaf. Dark green kale repels this cool water, silver air trapped close. White veined chard, tender leaves and stems hold more water. I gently shake and let drip longer. We return to the fields to harvest eggplant. Smooth, deep, rich purple skin, iridescent, irresistible to run your fingers along to stroke. I place each alongside its slender pink cousins. The heat gathers and rises slowly, promising a hot, humid day. We feast on cherry tomatoes, fire engine red, greenish purple, orange, yellow, little explosions of sugar and acid on the tongue. We giggle and debate which one is best. Names of varieties dissolve into color descriptions. Handfuls pass from hand to mouth. Back to work, I pick the last cucumber with a twist of waxy skin and pimples. Then I use a knife to separate zucchini from stem, and almost as if knowing I was there, sandpaper leaves grab my calves, rub hairs in with sweat, prompting vigorous itching and scratching between the rows. More washing, more packing, water sprays, sparks of silver everywhere, mud on our soles, the sun roasting our necks. We bend over sweet peppers hidden under broad green leaves, bright yellows and reds, some round, others long and slender. Their smooth, shiny skins, a colored feast, a bounty. The noon heat stifles our breath and we retreat to the kitchen. Laura slices long colored peppers, tosses them with fried onions and chicken, layers on fresh tomato picante, cilantro just cut, hangs pungent in the air. I hastily wrap this food, my mouth open, like an infant waiting, juice oozing down my pinky. Laura laughs as each struggles to capture food. A meal gathered around a gray weathered picnic table, a community under a tree. Satiated and sleepy, we return to the fields for the beets, for their sacred greens, for the blood underground. Okay, I hope you have a chance to touch one of these books. It's quite special to feel the paper, and for my life's work of working outside with nature, it's nice to feel the material of nature. particularly in this book. I feel very privileged to work with Frances Hunter and building that. Okay, this one is called May 31st, 2020. Today I go to the mountains, points high and low, forested and burnt, to record the voice and song of birds, to know their homes and habits, to discover their lives. I wonder, what kind of journalist am I, my march so far from theirs? When I strap the recorder to the strong trunk of tree I speak, this is Kurt Trzcinski, deploying Unit 20 at station R02-07 at 10:45 a.m. on this tragic day in history, May 31st, 2020. I pause to remember George Floyd. As I walk away, every recorded footstep grows softer until there is just the sound of the wind and the distant drum of the black-backed woodpecker. This poem's called The Dune. There's one tuft of grass, 2 or 3 stems away from the dune of brothers. Out in the sand, tiny boulders roll around each stem's reddish base, closer to the salt, carried on wind, green and bending landward, a rougher life alone. 2. Many seeds fell, others buried, a few blew back to dune's edge. These seeds opened not this year, maybe last or before, when the sun and wind and water were right. The roots reached deeper, drawing from mother's seed, energy searching new and forsaken ground. 3. Today is harsh, the wind strong and cold. On sunny days, leaves reach higher, stand taller, a sentinel. The dune may advance to join the pioneer or recede back into the forest. This poem's called Fall Flock. 1. In a moment, they were all around me, feathers, chirps, calls, families of different sizes and sounds, together to forage and feed on my porch, in yard, lawn, trees, chasing each other, curious, maybe even jealous of sibling discoveries. 2. Pygmy nuthatches release high-pitched squeaks and raspy whispers. Chickadees repeat their name, remind each other of their individuality, sometimes spelling their name in full, more often in short, incessant versions. Pine siskin's cheerful chatter interjected with a urgent rising question. Tippity-tee, zoop, tippity-tee, zoop. A hummingbird in the middle of the fray seems lost, searching for a red flower. A pair of bluebirds, part of the sky brought to branch and fence post, dive to snap insects just above the lawn. Red-breasted nuthatches complain upside down, wah-na-na. Their partner persists with an even more nasal wah-na-na. I sit on the porch, surrounded, taken in by their revelry, their calls, songs, and complaints all about me. They didn't take notice, flying so close, touching my shoulders with feather and wing. The last pygmy nuthatch delays, then joins the playful chase. The flock, maybe 100, moves on to feed and explore. 3. The air splits with a piercing cry. A red-tailed hawk hunts overhead. A lone robin sounds the short chink, chink alarm call. A solitary flicker laughs, leaving an awkward silence. This will be the last poem, so thank you for being here. This poem I wrote in French Guiana. Rain, 92 millimeters. After strong rain, a deep quiet. Water drips, snapping on lower leaves. Only a few crickets scratch, and then a bird calls, tee-too-too, trip, snap, and her mate answers, tee-too-too. Stillness echoes in my soul, hollows out the last bits, scrapes clean a fundamental pitch with harmonic overtones, a resonance, a call, and for a moment of unknowing, I am song. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kurt. What a great line to end on. I am song. I forgot my thing. I was carried away. Thank you, Kurt. If you have not already gone over to check out those books, they are works of art in themselves. So I highly recommend go and touch them, smell them. They have a good smell. Okay. So I'm really thrilled to welcome now our featured reader of the evening, Meghan Fandrich. Meghan lives with her young daughter on the edge of Lytton, BC, the village that was destroyed by wildfire in 2021. She spent her childhood and much of her adult life there in Nlaka'pamux Territory. I apologize, I should have looked that up before I came here. Where two rivers meet and sagebrush-covered hills reach up into mountains. For the last decade, she ran Klowa Art Café, a beloved and vibrant part of the community. Klowa was lost to the flames. Burning Sage is Meghan's debut poetry collection. I think that I will just let Meghan's poetry speak for itself and welcome her up to the stage here for this part of the floor, which I'm imagining is the stage. Go ahead, Meghan.
This is my first time using a mic, but is this okay?
Yep.
Yes? Okay. I'm used to shouting, so I apologize in advance if I shout into the room. Yeah, I'm used to projecting. I'm a single mom, so I'm really used to projecting. So first, thanks to Zoe and to Planet Earth Poetry and to Kim and Brentwood Bound Books. It's like really like such an honor to be here. And to be in a room full of poets. So I'm not a poet, and this feels a bit awkward. I wrote a book that came out as poetry. And I admire everyone here who is able to just write poems, maybe even when they're not dealing with intense trauma. Mine was just trauma poems. I also want to thank the women who are here from Lytton tonight. Thank you, because you're carrying the loss of our town with you here. And I want to thank all of you for listening and for reminding me to speak into the mic and not shout. So I'm Meghan. I'm from Lytton. As Zoe said, before the fire, I ran a Klowa Art Café. So it was a coffee shop and local art store and just a lovely place to be. And I was at Klowa when the fire hit. And probably, I'm guessing everyone here has heard of Lytton. Before the fire, I would say that I'm sure no one here has actually heard of Lytton. Okay, good, yeah. But definitely since the fire, I mean, everyone knew that moment, right? We were on the world stage. And for me, I was in that moment. I ran from the flames. I evacuated with my community. I lost my community. I lost my business. But it seemed like my life had to go on somehow. But to the world, we were still just that moment. We were still just the sensational moment of running from the flames. We were still the town that burned to the ground. Did you hear about the town named Lytton? And for me, with life going on, but the world being stuck on that moment, it felt like I became invisible. It felt like all of us who were left all of us who were left walking the streets of Victoria, or scattered around the rest of the province, or still living on the edges of Lytton, that we were invisible. And so in a way, this is me becoming visible. And this is me becoming visible. So thank you for being here. I'm going to read one of the first poems from the book. This feels weird because I'm used to pacing back and forth like quite violently. But I'm going to try. I'm going to try and stay still. So I'll read, one of the first poems. And I wrote the book not because I wanted to tell a story, but I wrote the book thinking I would just write out one little memory for a friend. I was going to do an art project. I was going to write out all these moments from my life, from traveling, put some photos in, ask my daughter to draw some pictures for it, and just do kind of a little art project about, it was someone who I had met 6 months before, and I just wanted to be like, here, this is me. And because I met him after the fire, he hadn't asked about the fire, I thought, okay, I'll write out, that moment, because it is pretty integral to who I am now. I'll write out, well, maybe not the moment of the fire itself, but I'll write out a fire memory. And I sat at the typewriter on the living room floor, and that's when it came out as a poem. And tears. And I hadn't really cried. This was more than a year after the fire. But I wrote it out, and there's that ching at the end of each line, so satisfying. And then took the page out and reread it and started crying. Then I kept writing, I kept sharing it, I kept building the stack of pages beside the typewriter. And I started to realize it was a book, it was a whole story about life after the fire. But I still hadn't written about that moment. I hadn't written about that sensational moment of running from the flames. And I knew I had to do it, right? I had to give the book kind of context, if you will. And so I made myself sit at the typewriter on the living room floor, and I made myself type out that memory. And it was last November, long after fire season was over. And I still jumped at every cloud outside for the next few weeks. And it was weeks before I could sleep again, just lying awake on my phone beside my daughter. And so at the beginning, I've been doing kind of book tour. I've been doing quite a few events, and I'm trying to read that poem because writing it didn't get it out of me. Writing, for so many of the other moments in the book, I wrote it out, I cried it out, and in a way I could move on from that specific memory. But this one, it's still in there. And so I'm going to read it tonight in my attempt to get it out of me. This is okay? Okay. So it's called 4:54 p.m. I leave the cafe and step onto the street. Everything is sepia. Everything is still. Everything is burning. Up to the highway, through a thick wall of yellow-black smoke, driving blind. Then break through. My house below me, green little oasis, surrounded by flames. I run things to the car. A basket of clothes, her favorite stuffies, the wide-eyed cat. A small shift in wind and my house is gone. And back in the car, in the rear view mirror, a fireball explodes across the highway above my house. Just above my house, there's a neighborhood, it's called IR-17, Indian Reserve number 17, and most of those homes were lost when that fireball crossed. My house wasn't lost. The wind was blowing just right, even though it was right beside the flames. The fire burned up the hill past me, and meanwhile was also burning the entire kind of plateau that Lytton is. My house didn't burn. It was a while before I knew that it hadn't burned. Yeah. I'm going to read one called At Siska. When everything is burning, there is no cell service, no internet, no connection to the worried world. I am not okay. So I go south on an empty highway to find a pocket of reception. Messages flood in by the hundreds from friends, family, reporters. No, I am not okay. I can't reply, can't focus, so I don't, except to write. We're safe. My town is gone. My cafe is gone. My house is likely also gone. I don't know what to do. I am not okay. At the roadside, other locals check messages too. We hug, say, love you, but we are not okay. We are not okay. The messages become too much. So I go north toward the fire on an empty highway. I am not okay. I was asked recently in an interview, kind of, what were you feeling in that moment? And to look back on it, there was no feeling, right? It was beyond feeling. It was beyond shock. It was beyond disbelief. And I think maybe the only way to put words on it is that the rug has been ripped out from under your feet and you are just falling and falling and falling. And it felt like, I think we were falling for months, more than a year. Maybe, I think some people are still falling. I'll read one more from that time, from the time of the fire. It's called Registration. I cried the whole way to the city, hours from home, days after the fire. I had to buy toothpaste, got lost in the aisles, shapes blurred into color. I couldn't. At the evacuation center, a kind volunteer tried to fill in my papers. Name? Yes. Birthday? I couldn't. So she found it on my license, told me the date. I nodded, crumpled. So yeah, I'm a single mom. My daughter was 5. She had just turned 5 when the fire went through. And her brand new bike that she got for her birthday from her best friend Mimi was at Klowa at the coffee shop when the fire went through. And I have a photo from when I went to the ruins months and months later of just that bike fallen over, aluminum melted in a puddle beside it. When we came home after evacuation, the house was okay, right? I didn't know what we were coming back to. I didn't know if there would be smoke damage. I didn't know anything. I didn't know anything. And we went home and we were told, like when I found out the house had survived, we were told that, the homes that were still left in the village of Lytton, which I think is maybe 20, kind of my house and then just south above the highway from me. We were told that we wouldn't be allowed home until we had services. So until we had, by services that you would think, water, electricity, internet maybe. When my daughter and I got home, my street had been forgotten. There are 3 streets left in Lytton with homes on them, and mine had been forgotten. There was no electricity. Helen needs a nightlight to sleep at night. So I was trying to just find glow sticks, in the camping bag and break those for her. Everything in the house was dead, right? The house plants are dead, the fridge is rotten, the bananas have like melted into an unrecognizable puddle. I wouldn't have known what it was, this banana puddle, except that I knew that's where I keep the bananas. The whole yard was dead. The sprinklers hadn't been on for a month, and it's the Lytton heat. And we didn't have water. Our water was on a do not consume order, which is beyond boil alert. And our water was on a do not consume order for 6 months before someone sent it for testing and said, oh no, turns out it was okay all along. So this is like living on the edge of the town I grew up in, on the edge of the town that I was going to raise my daughter in. But it's just chimneys and shells of buildings. And there we are trying to get through. And we had neighbors up the hill, just on the other side of the highway, but not visible. I have one more house on my street, but Grandma Dodge, she had just passed away before the fire. Her estate couldn't rent out the home because they couldn't get insurance because the fire was too close. So it was just us in that neighborhood, and there's no more post office, there's no more grocery store, there's nowhere to bump into people. And so again, it still just felt like we were just that moment. We were just the moment of the fire. We were so invisible. I was there in my home. I heard Trudeau say, in Canada, there was a town named Lytton, as I was sitting there in the village of Lytton, but just not in the village of Lytton. And that winter, it was awful. It was awful. So, I mean, no water, no food. School, thank God, there's 2 schools in Lytton and neither of them burned. So I was walking my daughter to kindergarten every day. It's within walking distance. You can't even see the ruins of town if you don't look down that way. And so we just look at the beautiful view at the mountains, at the river. And I was dealing, with, I mean, you can imagine the intense trauma, but trying to keep things steady and safe for her, walking her to school. I would drop her off and I would go home and just be a complete numb wreck of myself. But I would get her to school. She would have a school lunch packed. I would manage it. And then when the atmospheric river hit, the big one that flooded out the coast, it washed out Highway 1 on both sides of Lytton. Completely. It also flooded Highway 12, which is the only other way out of Lytton, which is kind of like a sketchy mountain. They call it a highway, but it's a 2-lane road and only one lane in some places. Pretty sketchy at the best of times. And so it washed out. And school closed because the teachers couldn't get in. The teachers were driving in from out of town. And they said it would be closed until the roads reopened, which was 2.5 months. So we had just been in school, Helen had just been in school for a month, maybe a month and a half. And then it was closed again. And then the winter was, of course, the worst winter that we had seen in decades, with the most snow that we'd seen in decades. And guess what? The snowplows burned up and no one thought to replace them. So the 4 or 5 feet of snow on your road means you can't leave home. And then the village of Lytton, which has been really extremely awful at communicating, did manage to communicate very clearly that roofs in the area are not engineered for this much snow and your roof may collapse.
Oh, God.
And it just felt like it was just one thing to survive after another, kind of like with COVID, right? So we had like COVID and lockdown and everything was awful, but then we just started to like adapt, right? We started to get used to things, and then there was another change, right? And then you're, okay, how am I going to manage this? And then another change. I remember the school, just Helen was in preschool, it just like closing again and again, and with different rules every time it reopened, and trying to adapt. And that's what that winter felt like, but I had no capability of adapting. I could just focus on keeping her alive. And I think that's what kept me alive. There was, the ruins of town were the ruins of town until really recently. Like there's still no rebuilding, but for over a year, those chimneys were still standing and the husks of the buildings were still there. When you drove down from my house kind of into town, it almost seemed like the grocery store was there. It still had its mural painted on the side. But when you drove past, there was no ceiling, no roof, and just the burned up like fossils of this, of, you know, the, what's the word, about the stands that everything is on. No, yes, not the foundation, no, just this, the shelving, there we go, thank you. So just, yeah, so this building that looks almost the same, but you look in and it's just sky and shelving that's burned. And so I had my coffee shop. It was like, yeah, a lovely space. I had the work of artists, local artists, and a courtyard outside that I had planted, you know, every single plant in that courtyard. And it was so vibrant and beautiful. Like it could finally, you know, like things take a little while and then they just take off. It was taking off. It had even survived those 3 days of the heat dome that we had when Lytton was 50 degrees, those days leading up to the fire. You know, fir trees were turning red. Their needles were turning red on the branch from the heat, but my little courtyard, like it was blooming, the lavender was blooming even bigger than normal. It was loving the heat. And then the building burns and the entire building fell into the courtyard. And so every time I drove by, I would see another plant just trying to grow up between the bricks. We were told at first that we would be allowed on our properties once and once only with a sifting organization. And so the first time I went, you know, I made my appointment with the sifting organization. This was 3 months after the fire. And I got there and they said, well, this wall of a building standing beside your coffee shop, because the village office burned, but the wall, one of the walls was still standing, just one of those like strange coincidences. But they said, no, the wall could come down at any minute, so we can't sift. So, and you can't step in off the sidewalk. And here's a Bible. And that's it. And so I left. And it was the next spring that we found out, again, okay, maybe we are allowed, but with a complete like safety orientation and an escort and, you know, a stranger sitting and watching you with your grief. But I had a friend come and she's a journeyman electrician. She has her confined space ticket. She convinced security that she would be my escort. And she had her ladder strapped to her work van and she just basically jumped into the basement. And so I just have a poem about that time. It's called Two. The second time I visited my ruins was in the spring, 9 months after the fire. The dangerous walls still standing, the loose bricks more settled, the ash and debris the same. A friend climbed into the basement, pit of ashes, with a hand rake, sifted for hours, uncovering relics of my past. Broken sculpture, fractured china, rusted jewelry embedded in pieces of shattered glass. I sat at the top, feeling nothing except a dull curiosity. How a burned doorknob can look like a vase, or knitting needles crumble with touch, or only the ugliest dishes survive. Feeling dull curiosity, but no attachment to this excavation of life. She brought up jars, herb-infused salts, products I made in the kitchen a few days before the fire. The glass still intact, just scorched. She set them gently on the sidewalk beside me, and one by one, I smashed them. The book that I wrote is about the experience. But for me, more importantly, it's also a love story about meeting someone and feeling seen for who I was, not for being that moment of the fire, not for being even the person I was before, the person who was a good daughter, you know, with my parents aging in the same town, a good wife, a good mother, a good small business owner, a good community member, none of that. I felt seen for me. And that love was what changed everything. By being seen, I could finally see myself. The breakup's in here too. But even with that, even by going through then the breakup and having to reach out to the friends around me, I was able to reach out to the friends around me and to realize that I had never been invisible. I was never just the person that existed in the moment of running from the flames. I was still me. And this big network of people was there just waiting for me to reach out, just waiting for me to call. And for me, that's been the biggest lesson, not just of the fire, but of the 41 years of my life. It's been the lesson to realize how much love and support is out there. As soon as we open our eyes to it, it's there. It's a room full of supportive people. It's, you know, the people who you haven't seen in 10 years, but you give each other a hug and nothing has changed. It's to all the people who answer the phone as soon as you call. It's made a big difference. I'm going to end the reading tonight with one of the last poems from the book, and it's called Sockeye. People are fishing today, the Nlaka'pamux, dipping their nets into strong water, hanging deep red flesh to dry in the wind, almost like life goes on. My neighbor brought me a salmon, a heavy gift, almost like she had always been next door, almost like her house didn't burn. I washed the dishes, sat down outside, watched a dry leaf shake in the wind, almost like I was okay. Thanks for listening, everyone.